On today's Locked On Thunder podcast, we're going to dive into how Chet Holmgren's injury impacts the Thunder's timeline, especially as it relates to Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. Will he be in OKC long term? Will he get fed up with the rebuild? What's going to happen with SGA's future in Bricktown? We're diving all into that on today's Locked On Thunder podcast on the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your teams every day.
You are Locked On Thunder, your daily Oklahoma City Thunder podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Let's get it going on the Locked On Thunder podcast, on the Locked On Podcast Network, your teams every day. I am your host, Rylan Stiles. You can follow me on Twitter at Rylan_Stiles. Follow the show on Twitter at LOThunderPod. Email the show, LOThunderPod@gmail.com. I'm a media member and editor-in-chief over at ThunderousIntentions.com. And on today's show, brought to you by BetOnline, we're going to dive into the Thunder's future without Chet Holmgren this year, Shai's timeline with the team, and what happens within this season without Chet Holmgren. Today's show is brought to you by BetOnline. BetOnline has you covered this year with more props, odds, and lines than ever before. BetOnline is where the game starts. I want to thank you so much right now for making us your first listen every single morning, every single day. We're here for you talking Thunder basketball. So far this week, we've talked about your mailbag questions, about how well Josh Giddey can progress as a shooter. We've talked about Chet Holmgren getting respect from other NBA executives around the league about him being the best rookie in 5 years from now from this rookie class. And we've discussed him being out for the season. I want to talk today about Shai. On today's show, I want to talk about Shai's just entire backstory in OKC and also take it and break it down. What my opinion on the situation is, what a negative opinion on the situation is, what a positive opinion on the situation is. So giving you all three angles of what's happening here in OKC and letting you decide for yourself, what's your opinion, what's the most likely outcome. We're going to try to get to the bottom of this because I think that after the Chet Holmgren news, the immediate reaction was to question whether or not this had an impact on Shai's happiness or SGA's future in OKC. And I don't think that we know yet. So here's the backstory. I want to use this as a preference point. So keep this in mind with everything that I'm saying the rest of this podcast. Of course, SGA was the centerpiece of the Paul George trade. He was the tangible centerpiece. Obviously, the picks were the biggest selling point, but he was the thing that you had it in your hand after you traded away Paul George. He's an all-star caliber player. He is an incredible player. He's a fun player, and he's my second favorite player in the league to watch. Of every player in the league, SGA is number 2, only behind Luka Doncic. Now, that is just watchability. That's just what I find enjoyable, is watching Shai play the game of basketball. Not about talent level, not about any of that, but I enjoy his style. I enjoy watching his game stylistically, and Luka Doncic's game as well, for my 2 favorite players to watch in this league. I would be incredibly sad if he plays in a different uniform between now and the end of his career. And if you trade SGA, I believe you spend that time looking for SGA. You spend that time looking for SGA. And as I say, as a disclaimer, every single time we even remotely broach this topic, the NBA is drama-filled. You can say what you want to about the league. You can say what you want to about how basketball's changed over the years and evolved all the way back from your grandparents' days of watching ball and their younger age all the way up until right now. You can talk about all the changes and just kind of decipher if they're good or bad. One thing everyone has to agree upon is that the NBA has more drama than any other league in American sports. It's why they play a lot of their games on TNT where drama happens. So you don't have to go looking for drama. You don't have to go seeking it out. It will find you. Eventually, as the NBA world turns, your team will be in the midst of some NBA drama. So I don't love the idea of just hunting it down, because it will eventually come to you in due time. So with all that out of the way, again, today's mission is to decipher what I think will happen what would be the positive outcome and what would be the possible negative outcome in all of this. So here's my take on the situation. I do not believe that this setback, this injury from Chet Holmgren, impacts the timeline or happiness of SGA. Because this was already a year in which OKC was not going to be true contenders. We could sell ourselves on maybe they make the play-in tournament, maybe they're 7 through 10. That's not true contention. And let's remember that you're dealing with Sam Presti, you're dealing with a forward-thinking organization and not a short-sighted one, not an organization in which you see the Kings, how the Kings are selling out to make the play-in tournament at all costs because they're trying to break a devastatingly long playoff drought. This team is forward-thinking, and they're going to think about their future. And if it gets to the All-Star break or a couple of weeks afterward, and the best you can do is the 10th seed or the 9th seed, they're going to look at that and say, what's more advantageous for our future? Getting to the 10th seed or getting a better chance at one of these generational talents in this draft? You can decipher how the Thunder would view that at that time and what they would do to pivot. So because of that, because of this year already, even with a fully healthy Chet Holmgren not looking like contenders, you didn't necessarily lose anything besides a year of growth between SGA and Chet Holmgren. But it's not as though Chet Holmgren disappears. Like, you still have Chet Holmgren on your roster. You still have him for the next 8 years. You still have him as a tool to improve SGA's game in the future. And you just bettered your chances of getting a blue chip prospect in next year's draft class, or at least, if force didn't hurt them or whatever. But there's a realistic shot that you add now a top 7 guy. And in my opinion, this draft is 7 deep of guys that I think can be your 1, 2, or 3 of a championship core. And whenever you already have a 1 in Shai, and then you have whatever Chet can be, and you have whatever Giddey can be, getting a top 7 guy in this draft does unthinkable things to your core in a positive way. There is still a lot on the line this season for SGA as well. Not only is he trying to make his first All-Star appearance and everything, but also this season is so important with finding a groove with Josh Giddey, trying to play together with Josh Giddey and kind of get into that kind of routine of playing alongside Josh Giddey. He also inked himself to a 5-year deal with no opt-outs, and he signed that happily. And he oftentimes says that he's in constant contact with Sam Presti. We know that publicly and privately, folks, that they are in constant contact with the plan and that SGA is excited about that plan. And again, even with this setback, this team has the chance to have the best young core ever. If all these guys pan out, this would be a historic young core. And you lose the dead money owed to Kemba Walker, $27.4 million. You lose the dead money owed to JaMychal Green, $5.6 million. And you lose the dead money owed to Kyle Singler, $999,000. So where you have no more dead money after the season's over with. And even though this injury from Chet Holmgren sets you back a year of development with Chet Holmgren on the floor, there's other avenues for him to take to develop. But the Thunder also have so many options to pivot, because they still have a ton of assets in draft capital with picks of their own, with picks owed to them from the Rockets, from the Jazz, who are looking to blow things up, from the Clippers. Like, they have a ton of draft capital to still go make an all-in move. They have a ton of options at their disposal to improve this roster around SGA, even after the season's over, even with entering the first year of Chet Holmgren next year with SGA and whoever you draft in the 2023 NBA draft class, which the 2023 draft projects to be closer to that of the 2021 draft class than the 2022 draft class, in which 2021, I mean, you went 5, 6, 7 names deep of guys you really, really like, of guys you really are happy with if you have invested in them over this last 2 draft cycles. When you think about that 2021 class, Cade Cunningham, Franz Wagner, Jalen Green, you have Josh Giddey, even Kuminga's looked good, and Mobley's looked good, obviously. Mobley's been incredible. Mobley's just been awesome. Scotty Barnes has been awesome. Like, you have so many guys that you really love from that class, and that can vastly overhaul the perception of your franchise. Evan Mobley has done that. Cade Cunningham has done that. Scotty Barnes has done that. Josh Giddey is a part of that with OKC. Him taking that rookie year leap last year and, looking the way he did as a rookie last year gives a lot of confidence. Again, think about where your emotions were whenever that card was revealed of Josh Giddey's name being called on draft day 2021. And think about where they are now whenever you hear the name Josh Giddey. Like, what we saw last year from that draft class was historic. It'll be very reminiscent of that draft class in 2023. Whenever you have guys like Victor Wembanyama, who is projected to be the best prospect since LeBron. So you have so many avenues to pivot that until we hear any negativity from Shai, I'm not there. I think that this is still going to be full force go, and that you are giving Shai the runway. You're giving Shai the opportunity. You're giving Shai the ability to be one of 30 players in this league who are the face of a franchise and to lead what could end up being a historic young core. That's what you're doing. That's what you're able to do at the end of the day. Now that I said my piece, let's flip this on its head and go to the negative version. And if you were to look at this from a glass half empty perspective, should the Thunder trade SGA, or should SGA demand out of OKC? We're going to talk about that coming up. But first, I want to say right now, about our good friends over at BetOnline. BetOnline.net is your number one source for all pro and college football betting needs and sports info this year. Find the latest football league developments, game matchups, news, and podcasts, including this year's opening week games. BetOnline is also your continued source for your sports wagering information, including live betting, esports, and scores. The fastest and best way to bet on your favorite sports and events, including MLB, MMA, boxing, golf, NFL, NBA. Go right now, head over to the website today and use your mobile device and learn more about the trends and actions this season. BetOnline is where the game starts. And folks, look, if you're like me and the only sport you truly feel comfortable with putting hard-earned cash down is basketball, well, you can still do that because they have NBA future bets, like who will win the NBA championship. The Celtics are plus 500, and the favorites to win the NBA championship. The Bucks are plus 600. The Warriors are plus 700 to repeat. The Nets and Clippers are tied for fourth at plus 750. You can also bet on who will win each division, and the Thunder are plus 20,000 to win the Northwest Division. The Nuggets, the favorites there, with the T-Wolves a close second at plus 140 to win the Northwest Division. So get in on that. Go over there, BetOnline, where the game starts. We are back on the Locked On Thunder podcast, on the Locked On Podcast Network, your teams every day. I am your host, Rylan Stiles. You can follow me on Twitter at Rylan_Stiles. Follow the show on Twitter at LOThunderPod. Email the show, LOThunderPod@gmail.com. On today's show, Locked On Thunder, we're going to dive into SGA and the possibilities of his timeline in OKC. So I give you my take, which is pretty positive. But let's look at the negative take and kind of walk this through. So let's say the darkest timeline plays out and SGA wants out. Because you know what? After this year is over, you only have 4 more years to capitalize on SGA's window in OKC. Meanwhile, Josh Giddey has 7 years left after this year. Chet Holmgren has 8 years left after this year. The new pick that you draft in 2023 has 9 years left on their contract after this year. Jalen Williams out of Santa Clara has 8 years. Usman Jeng has 8 years. Trey Mann has 7 years. So all these guys have 7 to 9 years left, while SGA only has 4. And, you know, the 2023-24 season, even if it goes perfectly, is still predicated upon Chet Holmgren and the incoming rookie to get up to speed and play a massive role for an NBA team. And typically young teams do not win big right away and don't win at all right away as young teams. And even making the play-in tournament, we're making the playoffs outright as a scrappy young team, that does not guarantee that you can get over the hump in the playoffs, because even SGA in the bubble playoffs, he was a shell of himself of who he was in the regular season that year. And that was his second trip to the postseason, and a postseason in which there was no crowd and no travel and no anything. So it takes young guys time to figure out. I think that if SGA plays in the playoffs this year, you know, or whenever his next time in the playoffs is, he's going to dominate. He's going to score 25 points a night in the playoffs. I believe in his playoff ability. I just say that to say it's obviously not an easy translation for young players to make, to go from the regular season to the regular season to the playoffs. Just like that translation from the college game or high school game or overseas game to the NBA game, regular season is not very easy at all either. So if we can agree that even if great lottery luck, let's say you land Victor Wembanyama, you get Victor Wembanyama, you get Chet Holmgren, you get SGA, you get Josh Giddey, you get this fun, incredible young team. Even so, the 2023-24 season will be about making the playoffs, will be about instilling a culture, will be about getting to the dance and not getting over the hump. So now you're down to 3 years left of SGA. And at that point, will he demand a trade? What if he demands a trade right now? Well, that's not a terrible scenario for OKC because number one, first and foremost, the Thunder have him under contract for 5 more seasons, 4 after this year. We just saw the Brooklyn Nets back Kevin Durant into a corner and get him out of his trade demand because the Nets couldn't find market value on a guy who they held the rights to for 4 more years. So if he demands a trade, let's say we live in the darkest timeline and we go into our closets in the fetal position and start crying our eyes out because another star doesn't want to be here. And once again, we're left holding the bag as the battered stepchildren of the NBA. Let's say that. Let's say that happens. And once again, your child's favorite player on the team is gone. Once again, that jersey you bought is now useless. Once again, you lose a possible all-star, you lose a possible star, you lose a possible superstar. Let's say that happens. Let's say that's how it goes. Either A, you force him to stay because he signed a contract, or B, you get fair market value for SGA, and you have one of the best general managers in the sport to get a nice haul for SGA and focus on the players with more years under team control. That's not a bad option, folks. I love SGA. Again, remember the start of this podcast. I love SGA. He's my second favorite player in the entire league, even as a non-Thunder fan, to watch. If I took off my Thunder fan glasses, he'd still be my second favorite player to watch in the NBA. Remember all of that when I say this. Him asking out is not a death sentence to this rebuild or to this organization because you trust Sam Presti to get a haul. And if he doesn't, he's not going to make the move. Because even Kevin Durant couldn't force his way out with a much less respected and regarded GM and coach and culture in Brooklyn and ownership group in Brooklyn. And even Kevin Durant still could not bully his way out. So SGA will not be able to, folks. I'm sorry. So either he demands a trade and Sam Presti gets a huge haul for him and you focus on the players who are under team control and this is no longer a storyline that is holding over OKC's head and the team and the players on this roster from now to the end of these 5 years. Or you keep SGA, he continues to thrive, he continues to be a star, and he continues to be exactly who you need him to be, and adding these young pieces to him allows you to be back into title contention in 2 or 3 years. You see how even the darkest timeline in OKC is not all that grim. In fact, we still found positives in the darkest timeline because the Thunder are set up in such a position in which this rebuild cannot go off the rails. You have a well-respected GM. You have too good of a culture. You have too good of assets, both on the floor and off of it in the draft pick category. You hate to say it this boldly, but there's no shot that this rebuild fails in OKC. There's just not. And I say that on the heels of your number 2 overall pick in Chet Holmgren being out for the entire season with a foot injury. And that's still the reality in which you live in. That's still where we're at in OKC right now with this rebuild. That's a pretty good space to be. That's a pretty good spot to be in. That's the negative aspect. That's the, zero dark 30, not again, the sky's falling aspect. Now, what's the over the moon positive realm in which this thing takes? What is the just uber positive, everything breaks right scenario for the Thunder, for SGA, and for this rebuild? We're going to talk about that coming up on the Locked On Thunder podcast, on the Locked On Podcast Network, your teams every day. We are back on the Locked On Thunder podcast, on the Locked On Podcast Network, your teams every day. Thank you again for making Locked On Thunder your first listen every single morning. Every single day, we're here for you. Free on YouTube, free on all your podcasting platforms. Every single episode is free. Go check us out wherever you get podcasts from. And now, for your second listen, go check out the Ultimate Pro Football Preview 2022, an 8-episode extravaganza to get you ready for the NFL season. The local team experts from the Locked On Podcast Network, plus the betting angle from Lee Sterling of Locked On Bets, all combining into one Ultimate NFL Preview. So search right now for the Ultimate Pro Football Preview 2022 on your Odyssey app, YouTube, or wherever else you get your podcast from, and you'll be able to find it there and listen and get set for week 1 of the NFL season and beyond. So if you haven't done your homework, if you checked out on the NFL in the offseason, now's a great time to jump back in, not only with your favorite team Locked On podcast, like for me, love Locked On Chiefs, not only for the national show Locked On NFL, but for this epic extravaganza preview podcast. Once again, the Ultimate Pro Football Preview 2022. Go check that out wherever you get podcasts from, including on YouTube, folks. Now let's dive into the positive aspect of this. Let's look at this through thunder-colored glasses. Let's let ourselves throw life and caution to the wind and just embrace the warm hug of a possible great scenario for OKC, which doesn't typically happen all that often. This team was never expected to do much this year. So why would SGA get upset if the Thunder, can't control this scenario anyway? It's not as though the Thunder were projected to be a playoff team and Chet Holmgren is 100% healthy and could play in the Thunder telling him not to, and they're just tanking for no reason. It's not like that. The Thunder can't play Chet Holmgren. Like, he physically cannot play the game of basketball. He has a Liz Frank fracture, like a Liz Frank injury, I should say. Their hands are, like, who could have predicted this? It was a freak injury that no one could predict, that no one could influence, and there's no shot to rehab him faster than the entire season. That's the bottom line. This did not have anything to do with OKC or the Thunder or what they wanted to have happen. And the team remains in constant contact with SGA, and SGA has kept a positive attitude about OKC this entire time. So, as I mentioned in the recap podcast about Chet's injury, sometimes you just throw your hands up and say, that's good old-fashioned bad luck, and you move on. And you try to get better. You try to just go forward. Now, what does going forward look like? Folks, there's still a world in which SGA becomes a superstar. He becomes a top 15 player in this league. And Josh Giddey, with the new shot doctor of Chip England, shoots 30 to 35% from three within the next 2 years. What if that happens? What if Josh Giddey shoots 30 to 35% from three within the next 2 years, plus his playmaking, plus his ability to score around the ring, plus, improved defense, which you can project by his frame and ability? And what if Chet Holmgren, when he steps on the floor next year, is the real deal, and he is an all-star, superstar caliber of player? Let's just give him all-star. Let's bring the reins all the way back in. What if Chet Holmgren's an all-star? But then what if the team gets Victor Wembanyama and he is truly a superstar and he is the best prospect since LeBron James, like many are saying? Well, now SGA is the face of a franchise when there's only 30 franchises, folks. And even whenever you expand to 32, there's only one per franchise that can be the face of the franchise. He's one of 30 face of the franchises. For a franchise that's on pace to do historic winning, whenever you have Chet Holmgren for 8 years, Victor Wembanyama for 9 years, Josh Giddey for 7 years. OKC could realistically get to the Western Conference Finals by the 2024-25 season. That's not this season, obviously. That's a playoff appearance next season where you fall short because you're just young and you can't close out a series. And the following season, boom, you're in the Western Conference Finals. And I truly believe that during the 2023 offseason, the Thunder will make a move that we consider a splash. It's hard to describe it because I don't want to say trade for a star, because then you're splitting hairs on who you classify as a star versus who I classify as a star. We'll know it when we see it. I truly believe that in the 2023 offseason, you will get a notification from your favorite newsbreaker on Twitter that you drop your jaw and you go into a scrolling panic on Twitter where all you do for the rest of the day, no matter if this happens at 3 a.m. or 3 p.m., all you do for the rest of the day is scroll Twitter and get info on this Thunder transaction, and you get just reinvigorated with Thunder excitement. I think that they're going to make that move in 2023. And again, we'll know it when we see it. Will it be a star? I don't know, but I think that they're for sure going to trade for a complementary piece to this roster, where maybe he wasn't a star on his former team, but with the role that the Thunder want him to play around SGA, around Josh Giddey, around Chet Holmgren, around Victor Wembanyama, or whoever they draft, he'll look really, really good. It'll elevate his game in a big way. There's still so much to be excited about that I don't think it's worth having these, doomsday outlook on the SGA situation. Because even if you want to have that outlook, even if you think it's best for the Thunder to cut ties with him, that is not some disastrous fiasco, right? We just went through it. So what's your opinion on this? Do you think that SGA would demand a trade? Do you think that the Thunder should trade him? Or do you think that the Thunder should let this thing ride and use SGA as a catalyst to the next wave of Thunder basketball? The big question for me, what do you think? Do you think that SGA will be on this team the next time the Thunder are considered title contenders? Or do you think that he'll be gone? For whatever the reason. The next time the Thunder are in these kind of, the Thunder could win an NBA championship, the next time they're in those discussions, is it because SGA is on this roster? Or is SGA already gone to his next team? Let me know what you think on Twitter at Rylan_Styles. Let me know what you think on the comment section on YouTube. Let me know what you think also on the email address. If you don't have Twitter or YouTube, check out the email address, lothunderpod@gmail.com. And until tomorrow, be good and be good to one another.